From that book began emerging, some revealing, some outright salacious, remarkable scenes from meetings with Presidents Obama and especially with President-elect and later President Trump at some of the most critical moments in recent history, including the Russian attack on American democracy. Our Randy Kate joins us now with all the latest. So what have you learned about the details in this book?
Well, Anderson, according to the Washington Post, in his new book, James Comey says Donald Trump brought up the intelligence dossier compiled a while back by a former British intelligence officer. That dossier alleged that Russians had a so-called P-tape of prostitutes that Trump had paid to urinate on each other and his bed in a Russian hotel suite. Comey reportedly writes in the book that Trump wanted Comey to investigate the allegations. Comey reportedly writes, he brought up what he called the golden showers thing, adding that it bothered him if there was even a 1% chance his wife Melania thought it was true. The paper says that Comey goes on to write, apparent play for my sympathy. Trump said that he has a beautiful wife and the whole thing has been very painful for her. He asked what we could do to lift the cloud. The former FBI director reportedly writes that Trump had offered varying explanations in a phone call as to why there was no such tape. I'm a germaphobe. There's no way I would let people pee on each other around me. No way. Anderson?
I'm not sure how to follow that, but
There are
a lot of Director Comey's personal observations of President Trump in the book as well.
Absolutely. Comey does not mince words, writing that when he met Trump at a pre-inauguration intelligence briefing, the 6'3" president-elect looked shorter than he did on television. His face appeared slightly orange, Comey reportedly writes, with bright white half moons under his eyes, where I assumed he placed small tanning goggles, and impressively coiffed bright blonde hair, which upon close inspection looked to be all his. The Post says Comey also observed the president's hands, writing, as he extended his hand, I made a mental note to check its size. It was smaller than mine, but did not seem unusually so. Anderson.
What does Comey say about how President Trump runs the White House?
This is interesting. The Washington Post says that Comey describes it like this, writing that the president built a cocoon of alternative reality that he was busily wrapping around all of us. The Post says Comey describes Trump as a congenital liar, an unethical leader, devoid of human emotion, and driven by personal ego. Now, according to the paper, Comey likens his interactions with the president to flashbacks to my earlier career as a prosecutor against the mob, the silent circle of assent, the boss in complete control, the loyalty oaths, the us versus them worldview, the lying about all things large and small. The result, the Post says, Comey writes, is the forest fire that is the Trump presidency. Anderson.
And just getting back to that dossier, what does Comey say about how he was chosen to tell the president about it initially?
Well, Comey and James Clapper reportedly briefed President Obama about it first. Then, according to the book, Obama asked, well, who plans to tell Donald Trump? Clapper reportedly said that Comey would. According to the paper, Comey writes in the book that Obama turned his head to his left and looked directly at me. He raised and lowered both of his eyebrows with emphasis and then looked away. Comey reportedly wrote that he thought Obama's, quote, Groucho Marx eyebrow raise was both subtle humor and an expression of concern. It was almost as if he were saying, good luck with that. Anderson, this is a 304-page tell-all, so this is really just scratching the surface.
Randy, thanks very much. There's late word from CNN's Pam Brown and Jeff Zeleny as well. White House officials telling them there are no plans at this point to respond to anything from the book tonight. People familiar with the matter said the White House and the RNC do not plan to respond to each individual report or allegation in the book, largely because they don't have the book and know less about these incidents in many cases than we do. I want to bring in our panel, Phil Mudd, Gloria Borger, Frank Bruni, and Alice Stewart. Gloria, I mean, Comey certainly does not seem to be pulling many punches here. In fact, he seems to be kind of poking the president, talking about his hand size and, you know, the white circles under his eyes from tanning.
Yeah, I think revenge is best served cold, and I think that is partly what this is. I mean, don't forget, this is the president who fired him. Comey was fired in a way that no one would want to be fired. He didn't know about it. He was halfway across the country. I think he has some scores to settle here, but moreover, I think it really gives us an important hint about what he has been saying to the special counsel and what his testimony would be about this question of obstruction. Here he says, you know, I'm not going to tell you whether I believe this is obstruction or this isn't obstruction, but he does give you chapter and verse about what the president was concerned about in certain areas. Largely, also, by the way, it seems that the president regarded the FBI as his own sort of personal fiefdom, and that he could use somebody like James Comey as his own personal investigator to help him out, particularly on the issue of the tapes and the question about whether Melania would be upset about it, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So yeah, it gives you a picture of a president who doesn't really understand the appropriate relationship between his office and an independent branch of government.
Yeah, Phil, I mean, given your experience with the FBI, Director Comey apparently kind of demurred and said that it might not look good for the president if people found out that he was asked to look into this. Does it surprise you? I mean, that's not is that appropriate for a president to ask the FBI to do?
It is not. Look, the indication to me is you have outsiders, that is the Trump team, coming into Washington, D.C. and thinking that the FBI is somehow going to investigate something for the president because the First Lady is concerned. The FBI is the chief federal investigative agency for the United States government. They investigate, based on probable cause, violations of federal law. If the First Lady of the United States is concerned about allegations in the press about what her husband has done, it's not clear to me why the FBI director should go down that path. The indication, Anderson, from that story to me is not just about the FBI. It's about a president who comes into Washington, D.C., and whether he's dealing with the Defense Department, the State Department, the FBI, or the CIA, looking at them saying, I should ask you a personal favor because you work for me as president. He does not understand his responsibility as commander-in-chief.
Alice, at another point in the book, according to the New York Post, Comey notes that the president said that it bothered him if there was even a 1% chance that Melania thought it was true, meaning the allegations in that tape about the stuff in the hotel room in Russia, to which Comey went on to say, quote, in what kind of marriage to what kind of man does a spouse conclude there's only a 99% chance her husband didn't do that? I mean, again, that is really harsh.
Sure, and this is, the problem is this is the kind of marriage that the president has. And to Phil's point, it's not the FBI's responsibility to lift the cloud with regard to these allegations. And to Gloria's point, this book in large part is about him getting revenge. This is more than anything about him getting revenge against the president for firing him. And while talk about the prostitutes in the hotel room in the dossier is going to make headlines and sell books and what people will talk about, the big picture, what this book is about, it's not about those details. In my view, the big picture of the book, we haven't read the book, but in the excerpts, this is more about Comey's view about the toxic consequences of lying, and it's about the problems with loyalty to one person over the truth. And in his view, as the FBI director, having a president try and get him to drop an investigation with Michael Flynn, which he had a huge problem with. Yeah. And that is the overall takeaway from this book. While the other part is salacious and is what we will be discussing, I view that as the takeaway.
Well, also, Frank, that the FBI director is essentially comparing the president to a mob boss.
Yeah, no, I mean, as was said in the introduction, there's no minced words here. I think from what we've seen of it, and we haven't read it in its entirety, it's an extremely shrewdly done book because Comey makes a point of talking about the fact that he worked in 3 administrations. He makes a point of criticizing people from each of those prior administrations, and it's clear he's doing that. So when he then tells you that Donald Trump is violating all the norms of the presidency, that Donald Trump is a danger to the country, that this lying isn't just something casual, but it's a real threat to democracy, he wants you to see him as someone who's willing to criticize a wide group of people, who comes at this with great depth of experience, with a breadth of view. And I think he does a lot in this book to bolster his credibility as he makes this case against Donald Trump.
Phil, you were shaking your head.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. Look, there are 2 books here. There's a book by someone who is at the core of decision-making by a flawed president. That decision-making involved the president trying to intercede in conversations about investigations that his staff and maybe he himself were involved with. And meanwhile, we get the former FBI director commenting on the president's hand and whether his hand was small and whether he had a tan and moons under his eyes. If I were the FBI director, I would have said, look, if you want to inform the American people about what's happening in America, stick with the facts and be careful about being seen as partisan. It's 2 books, and I'm afraid the second book, The Salacious Stories, is going to divert from the first book. How is this president as a national security leader?
Gloria, I mean, it does provide ammunition to those who, sure, obviously in the GOP and elsewhere, who are going to want to, come after Comey hard. To Phil's point, it's not, sort of straight down the middle. Even the idea of writing a book like this so soon after serving in an administration, revealing behind-the-scenes details and stuff, rubs people the wrong.
Yeah,
Some people the wrong way.
I agree with Phil. I think you walk a fine line here, but I think that Comey may appear more partisan than he should want to appear, because these are very serious issues he's dealing with about separation of power, about the toxicity that he believes emanates from this White House throughout the government, stemming directly from the president. And those are serious charges and serious issues. And then when you talk about, well, I was kind of looking to see what size his hand was, it's just not funny. It's kind of like either you're serious or you're not, or you're not serious about this. And I think that Comey is trying to raise a lot of ethical issues here, not only in the way he was treated, but in the way people have to pay fealty to Donald Trump if they work for him, even if they believe that he is not telling the truth. And those are really, really important issues. So the question I have is, and again, we haven't read the whole book, so we need to do that, is why would you diminish those very serious points with other things?
And I think that's part of what sells books. Clearly, those details about the hands and the suntan, those are going to be the things that people will pick up on. But in my view, what we're hearing about the overall context, the loyalty, the obedience to someone that has a loose association with the truth, but also, in my view, this is Comey's way of making a stand for the FBI, which for a president that he viewed constantly undermined the law enforcement arm of the FBI and many of our law enforcement agencies. And this is his way of setting the record straight about a president that he views has been attacking the FBI.
Well, we also don't know how much real estate, the stuff about the color of his face, the hands. We've seen
that
people,
stuff is sent out to...
We've seen journalists tease out the stuff that is the most salacious and the most gossipy because that's what we put in our articles. That could be a very, very minor portion of the real estate of this book.
He does go on, the Washington Post quotes Comey as writing, they lose, talking about liars in the White House, they lose the ability to distinguish between what's true and what's not. They surround themselves with other liars. Perks and access are given to those willing to lie and tolerate lies. This creates a culture which becomes an entire way of life. I mean, pretty stunning stuff.
Right. Yeah. I think he thinks it's toxic. I think he thinks it's a toxic administration, and he wants to sort of get that across. What we also know, and we have to read in this book, is Comey's defense of himself and what he did during the election to hurt Hillary Clinton's chances for re-election by releasing information about investigations into her email. And I haven't read that yet, but I'm very curious about what he's going to say about himself, because he has been criticized extremely by Democrats on that.
There's clearly a self-serving dimension to the book, because we know that he says Obama turned to him. He recounts Obama turning to him and sort of basically saying, I know you tried your best. He recounts Chuck Schumer coming up to him with tears in his eyes saying you were in an impossible position. So for sure, some of this book is going to be read as extremely self-regarding and maybe less credible for it. But I think from what we've seen, it's also this book equal parts cry from the heart and sort of existential sigh of concern about what he sees happening in the White House and who he sees inhabiting the White House.
We got to take a quick